Today we're going to be talking about fuel tanks, specifically the 51 to 56 Packard fuel tanks. On my 54, I have a new tank in there, reproduction unit, as well as a new fuel sender. However, my gauge in the front is only reading half full whenever the tank is all the way full. And it is a new old stock gauge and tested, and it does work. So something's going on with the sender, so I'm going to go ahead and drop the tank today and take a look and see what's going on. So we'll go through how that is to be done and how to put it back together again. First step is get the gas out. I don't know how much gas I have in there. It's anywhere between 0 to 10 gallons because my gauge reads empty at about 10. So I'll drain out whatever I have left. I'm going to siphon out as much as I can first and then drain the rest. Looks like I got siphoned out what I could do there. There wasn't much, so we're going to go ahead and drain the rest of this tank here now. All right, you don't necessarily have to lift the car up in order to get to the drain plug, but it does make it a lot easier. All right, looks like we're just about done draining here. So go ahead and put the plug back in. All right, next step is to take off the fuel line that runs up to the front of the car. Normally, you would be taking it off right here, but I actually cheated and I cut off a section of the original line and made a flex hose there instead. I did that for two reasons. One, the original line was super stiff and it was really hard to get it lined up into the tank. But then number two, the flare on the old line was bad. So I was getting a constant leak there. So I went ahead and cut that off and then cut off a new portion of fuel line with a new flare and put that in there. So not original, maybe not totally ideal, but so far it's worked well. If you're going to do something like this, the conventional wisdom is to put 2 clamps on each end. I've only done 1. And also it helps to kind of do a bit of a flare on the ends, the open ends. So it makes a bit of a bulge that the clamps can kind of hold to. Again, I did not do that. This is the suction side, so it doesn't receive really any pressure, but it is important to make sure that there's no air leaks. So I have not had any of those issues. I have not had any air leaks at all, so this is working well for me. But if you're going to do something like this, you may want to consider those recommendations. Ideally, just use the original fuel line, or if you're going to replace it front to back, use that, the hard line instead of doing the soft. I will end up replacing this most likely with the fresh one. It's been a couple of years, so it's about time for a new one. But we'll go ahead and take this off, drain that, and then we're ready to drop the tank. All right, let's go ahead and get this thing dropped on the ground. You need to disconnect the sender. So get into the trunk here, and you'll see right here, there's a little grommet that comes up from underneath. This is where the sender wire comes through, and it's this one right here. So this one's orange. There you go. So we'll go ahead and push that back through the grommet. So to get the tank down, you're going to want to support it. So I'll go ahead and put our jack up underneath that here, and I got some cardboard underneath it to keep it from scratching and denting this thing up here. The replacement tanks are painted, so this just helps to keep it looking fresh. Okay, we're supported. We need to undo the vent hose right here. This goes up over the frame rail. So just undo it on one side, and we can get this to slide off. There you go. So that now can come out over the frame rail. I also have on mine this little wire here. This is an auxiliary ground wire that you may or may not need. I added it just because sometimes it doesn't ground well through the tank. So I'm gonna take this off here while I'm at it. I also have another ground wire up here that I was using on a different spot of the tank. Just testing out different things to see if I could get a better connection between this and the gauge. So you'll see this one's connected up to the fuel sender. You'll need to remove the bolt that holds in the exhaust here so that this can hang and push it out of the way. Otherwise, it gets caught on the flange right up here of the fuel tank. So now we need to get the T-bolts loose. There's 2 of them. And I believe these are 9/16. They are. So deep socket on these. So they don't have to be all the way out, but loose enough to be able to get the T-bolts to twist up there and come out, just like that one. So now that'll drop out there. Okay. So with those out of the way, we start dropping the tank here. All right, so we got the tank out. One thing that I should note is that you'll likely have to remove the exhaust hanger so that you can push that out of the way, and then you can get the flange out. Once it's dropped, if you haven't already disconnected the sender at the trunk, you can go ahead and disconnect it here, which is what I did. You'll see I have this other wire. This is a ground wire. Sometimes the tank doesn't ground very well to the frame and the sender won't work well. So what you can do is you can stick a wire down here between the sender and the lock collar, and you can then attach that to somewhere to ground. The other thing you can do is there's a little hole that I drilled right here on the flange, and you can put a screw in there and run a wire to a ground as well. Just make sure that if you're doing this, that you do it where you have space to. You don't want to do it on the inside of where the 2 flanges are pressed together. So we'll go ahead and take out the sender here now, and let's see if we can figure out what's going on with it. Yeah, so that's how you get the tank down. I'll work on this sender here, and once I get things working, then we can put this thing back in. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and test the fuel gauge to make sure that that's working correctly. So what I have here is this wire is going all the way to the back. This is connected to the fuel tank sender wire that connects at the tank. And that would connect right here on top, okay? And then out here is grounded. You can see there's a little fiber washer there right in between the post and where the rest of it is. So this would be grounded, this is going to the wire. One way you can test the gauge here is to ground it out first and see if it moves. It should go all the way to full. So we're gonna go ahead and turn the key to the on, and we'll see if this is a good ground right here. There you go. So you can see the gauge moving all the way up. So gauge works, and then it'll slowly float back down now that I've pulled it off. So no problems there. Now we need to figure out if the sender is working. So we're gonna go ahead and connect that wire there. I'll grab this here to the ground, and I'll connect that to my ground there. Okay. So as we move the float up, the fuel gauge should go all the way up. And it looks like it is. So I'm going to go about halfway down now. Let's see what that does. So it looks like the gauge is working correctly, and so is the sender, which leads me to believe that I must have something going on with the float, or something keeping it from floating all the way up to the surface. Because yeah, there's full right there, all the way up, and the gauge is moving all the way up. So I'll do some digging, see what I can find out here. So one of the things I'm going to do before I put the tank back in is I'm going to be cutting a hole in the floor pan of the trunk in order to easily access the sender again in the future if I need to. That way, hopefully I never have to drop the tank again. It's not the worst job in the world, but it's not that much fun either. So thankfully there's been some measurements that have been provided. I believe Ross Miller of Speedwell Garage did these first and sent them out, but these can be found on packardinfo.com. But I'll just show them to you here. You can see faintly, it might be a little hard to see in the camera here, but I have drawn out a square. That is measured from the inside wall of the spare tire tub to this outside line of that square is 11.5 inches. So from here to here, 11.5 inches. The top line is measured from right about where it starts to curve up down here, 6 inches. Then the square is more a rectangle. It's going to be 4 inches tall, 3¼ inches wide. Okay, so once this is cut out, that should give me perfect access directly to the fuel sender, so that I can change it out if I need to in the future, or continue to troubleshoot without having to drop my tank. So something to think about. You may or may not want to cut the trunk floor in your car. I'm not too concerned about it because it's never going to be seen, and I'll save the piece. If I ever wanted to put it back, I can always do that. But I just don't anticipate that happening at all. So I'm going to go ahead and get geared up and get that done. All right, I'll clean up the edges here, make sure that everything's good to go, and then we can get that fuel tank back in. All right, so putting the sender back in here. So we want the float facing towards the rear so it doesn't get hung up. So I'll put that in there. So you need to make sure you have rubber seal, rubber gasket underneath that. Get this back on. And then the tabs. Right. So now we'll just get this thing repositioned and get it back in. So one of the things that you'll find sometimes is that these T-bolts can be a real pain to get back in place. You'll find it a little easier to use a jack and just kind of force it up inside. And then once you get it high enough, maybe a little bit higher, then you can hopefully take just a set of pliers and spin it so the T drops into place like so. There you go. And then we can get our impact gun and get those nice and tight. Make sure that we have our protective strips where they are supposed to be. All right, so we'll finish hooking everything back up here. I am gonna hook up my ground wire that I was using before. The vent needs to get tightened up again. Lastly, the fuel line. So remember, normally this will be a solid line, and mine is not. Got our drain plug back in, exhaust reconnected. We're set to go. And you can see right here with the cutout, I've got easy access to my sender. So if I have another problem, I can just open that right back up and be back in business. And with my little floor mat there, can't even tell it's there. Double check for leaks. Looks good. You can see now that the fuel gauge works, although it looks like I'm going to need to probably do some bending on the float arm because the reading is a little bit off, shooting all the way up to the very top when it's full. But better than it was. In the past when it was full, it would only go up to the half, so that's an improvement.